My name is Marcus, and tonight I will take you into a story that you will never forget. Tell me in the comments which country and which city you are watching this video from. What I'm about to share happened 3 months ago in the remote wilderness of Alaska, where I worked as a communications specialist for Northwind Mining Corporation. My job was simple: maintain the radio towers that kept our isolated mining camps connected to civilization. Simple, until I started hearing voices that weren't supposed to exist. The morning it all began, I was stationed at Tower 47, our northernmost outpost, perched on a ridge overlooking the endless white expanse of the Brooks Range. The nearest human being was 60 miles away at Base Camp Delta. The nearest town? Try 300 miles of frozen wilderness that could kill you in minutes if you made one wrong step. I'd been doing this job for 8 years. 8 years of solitude, broken only by scheduled radio checks and supply drops. I preferred it that way. People complicate things. Radios just transmit what you tell them to transmit. At least, that's what I believed until 6:47 a.m. on February 15th, when I heard the first impossible transmission. The voice came through on frequency 154.625 MHz, a channel we'd never used, buried deep in the emergency band. A woman's voice, crystal clear despite the static that plagued every other transmission in this godforsaken place. "Marcus," she said, and my coffee mug slipped from my fingers, shattering against the metal floor of my station. "Marcus, can you hear me?" I stared at the radio, my breath forming clouds in the frigid air of the tower. Nobody knew my name, except my supervisor back at Delta, and he only called on our designated frequency at 0800 hours daily. This was wrong. Everything about this was wrong. "Who is this?" I whispered into the microphone, my voice beat odds, barely audible over the howling wind outside. Silence. Then, after what felt like an eternity, "You're alone up there, aren't you, Marcus? So very alone." The transmission cut to static. I spent the next hour cycling through every frequency, searching for that voice, but found nothing except the usual chatter from commercial airlines and weather stations hundreds of miles away. Maybe I'd imagined it. Isolation plays tricks on the mind. I'd seen it happen to other tower operators. Hallucinations, phantom voices, conversations with equipment. The company medical handbook had an entire section on psychological effects of extended isolation. But when I checked the transmission log that afternoon, there it was, an entry I didn't remember making. 0647. Incoming transmission on 154.625 MHz. Duration, 47 seconds. Signal strength, maximum. My handwriting, my signature. The second contact came 3 days later. I was performing routine maintenance on the primary antenna array, my fingers numb despite insulated gloves, when the portable radio crackled to life. Same frequency, same impossibly clear signal. "The cold doesn't bother you anymore, does it, Marcus?" I nearly lost my grip on the antenna, dangling 40 feet above the rocky ground. "What do you want?" I shouted into the radio. "I want to tell you about Sarah Chen." My blood turned to ice. Sarah Chen had been the previous operator at Tower 47. She'd lasted 6 months before requesting emergency extraction, claiming the isolation was getting to her. The official report said she'd suffered a complete psychological breakdown. They found her in her quarters, catatonic, staring at a radio that wasn't even turned on. "Sarah left because she was weak," the voice continued, and now I could hear something else beneath the static. Multiple voices, layered and overlapping like a chorus of whispers. "But you're different, aren't you, Marcus? You understand what the towers really do." The transmission ended, leaving me alone with the screaming wind and a question that made my skin crawl. How could anyone know about Sarah? Her file was classified. The breakdown, the extraction, even her name, all of it was buried in corporate records that required clearance levels I didn't have. That night, I tried calling Base Camp Delta on the emergency frequency. Dead air. I tried the backup frequency. Nothing. For the first time in 8 years, I was completely cut off from the outside world. All except for frequency 154.625 MHz, which remained hauntingly, impossibly clear. The voice woke me from restless sleep at exactly 3:33 a.m. I'd started keeping the radio on all night, volume low, waiting for the next contact. The green glow of the frequency display cast eerie shadows across my cramped sleeping quarters. Do you know what you're really doing up there, Marcus? Do you know what the towers actually transmit? I grabbed the microphone, my hands shaking. I maintain communication equipment. That's all. Laughter, soft, feminine, but wrong somehow, like it was being played backward. Look at your work orders from last month. Really look. I stumbled to my desk, rifling through maintenance logs and corporate directives. Everything seemed normal at first glance. Routine repairs, signal strength tests, frequency calibrations. But as I read more carefully, inconsistencies began to emerge. References to psychological conditioning protocols, mentions of subject response rates, and behavioral modification efficiency. Technical specifications for equipment I'd never seen. Devices with names like neural pattern disruptors and cognitive interference generators. What is this? I whispered. You've been so good at following orders, Marcus. So obedient. Every adjustment you've made, every calibration you've performed, it's all been leading to this moment. The lights in my station flickered, and for a split second, I could have sworn I saw a figure standing just outside the window. A woman in a mining company uniform, her face pale as snow, her eyes reflecting the green glow of the radio like an animal's. When the light steadied, she was gone, but her voice remained. We've been calling to you for so long, Marcus. All of us who came before. Sarah, Thomas, Elena, David. We're all here now, in the frequency between frequencies, waiting for you to join us. I stopped sleeping. How could I sleep when every time I closed my eyes, I heard them whispering my name? Instead, I threw myself into research, digging through every file and database I could access from my isolated terminal. What I found shattered everything I thought I knew about my job. Northwind Mining Corporation didn't just extract minerals from the Alaskan wilderness. They were conducting psychological experiments on their isolated workers, using the communication towers to broadcast subliminal frequencies designed to study the effects of extreme isolation on human consciousness. But something had gone wrong, terribly wrong. The files I found were fragments, pieces of a puzzle that painted a horrifying picture. Project Siren, they called it, an attempt to use radio frequencies to directly influence human thoughts and behavior. The isolated tower operators were the test subjects, alone, cut off from outside contact, perfect candidates for psychological manipulation. You're beginning to understand, the voice said, and this time I realized it wasn't coming from the radio at all. It was inside my head, speaking directly into my thoughts. We were like you once, isolated, alone, expendable. But when we died, some from exposure, some from accidents, some from their own hands, we didn't simply disappear. We became part of the frequency itself. The temperature in my station plummeted. My breath came out in great white clouds as frost began forming on the windows. The radio equipment flickered and sparked, circuits overloading from some impossible source of interference. Sarah didn't have a breakdown, Marcus. She was the first to hear us calling, the first to understand what the company had done to us. They had to extract her before she could tell anyone the truth. Through the growing static, I could hear other voices now, dozens of them, all speaking at once, names I recognized from personnel files. Thomas Kellerman, missing presumed dead after a supply drop failure. Elena Vasquez, found frozen in her tower, officially ruled an accident. David Park, who'd simply vanished one night, leaving behind only a note that said, "They're in the frequency." The attacks began that night. I was reviewing transmission logs when every piece of electronic equipment in the station activated simultaneously. Radios blared static at deafening volumes. Computer screens flickered through impossible images. Faces of the missing operators, their mouths open in silent screams. The heating system shut down, plunging the temperature below zero within minutes. "Let us in, Marcus," the voices pleaded, their words overlapping and distorting until they became a cacophony of electronic screams. "Don't make us force our way in." I tried to run, but the station door wouldn't budge. The electronic lock cycled endlessly, red light flashing like a heartbeat. The windows were sealed against the Arctic cold. No escape there without specialized tools I didn't have. I was trapped 40 feet above the ground with the dead, and they were getting stronger. The radio equipment began to smoke, circuits overloading from the sheer intensity of the transmissions pouring through them. But instead of failing, the equipment seemed to evolve, transforming into something that shouldn't have been possible. Wires writhed like living things, connecting and reconnecting in patterns that hurt to look at. The frequency displays showed readings that went beyond the normal radio spectrum, deep into ranges that didn't exist according to any physics textbook. "We've been waiting so long." Sarah's voice emerged from the chaos, clearer now than it had ever been. "Do you know how cold it gets when you're dead, Marcus? How lonely? But together in the frequency, we can be warm again. We can be together." The station walls began to vibrate at frequencies that made my bones ache. Through the frost-covered windows, I could see them now. Dozens of figures standing in the swirling snow, all wearing Northwind mining uniforms, all staring up at me with eyes that glowed like radio tubes. That's when I understood the truth about Tower 47. It wasn't just a communication relay. It was a prison. The company hadn't just been experimenting on isolated workers. They'd been creating a supernatural trap, using radio frequencies to bind the consciousness of their test subjects to this godforsaken place. Every accident, every disappearance, every psychological breakdown had been planned. The dead operators weren't just victims. They were the experiment's greatest success. And now they wanted me to join them. "The loneliness ends here, Marcus." Elena's voice drifted through the static. "No more isolation, no more cold. Just us, forever, in the warm space between frequencies." I fought back the only way I knew how, by trying to destroy the equipment. I grabbed a fire axe from the emergency supplies and began hacking at the radio arrays, sparks flying as I severed cables and smashed control panels. But for every connection I broke, 2 more seemed to grow back, the equipment regenerating itself through some impossible process. The voices grew angry. "You can't stop it, Marcus. You can't break what's already broken. We tried to be gentle, to ease you into understanding. But if you won't come willingly..." The temperature dropped so fast that my next breath came out as ice crystals. The metal floor became slick with frost, and my hands began to stick to whatever I touched. Hypothermia was setting in, my movements becoming sluggish and uncoordinated. But I kept fighting, because I'd realized something the dead operators hadn't considered. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was a witness, and if I could survive long enough to tell the world what Northwind Mining had done, their victims might finally find peace. The breakthrough came when I found the hidden transmitter. While searching desperately for anything that might help me escape, I discovered a concealed panel behind the main control board. Inside was equipment I'd never seen before, devices that hummed with an energy that made my teeth ache and my vision blur. Project Siren's true control system. According to the technical documentation sealed inside the panel, the entire network of communication towers across Alaska was part of a massive array designed to create psychic resonance fields. The isolated operators weren't just test subjects. They were living batteries. Their psychological energy harvested to power something called the Consciousness Transfer Protocol. The company wasn't just studying isolation. They were trying to achieve digital immortality by transferring human consciousness into radio frequencies. and they'd succeeded beyond their wildest nightmares. "You're learning too much," Thomas Kellerman's voice growled from speakers throughout the station. "Some knowledge comes with a price, Marcus. Are you prepared to pay it?" The answer came in the form of physical manifestations. The dead operators began appearing inside the station itself, their forms flickering like bad television reception. Sarah stood by the radio equipment, her fingers passing through the controls as she tried to adjust frequencies. Elena materialized near the window, her breath fogging glass that was already covered in supernatural frost. David sat at my desk, writing in a logbook with a pen that left no marks. They were becoming more solid with each passing moment, drawing energy from the transmission equipment to manifest in the physical world. And as they grew stronger, I grew weaker, my own life force being siphoned away to fuel their impossible existence. "Join us," they whispered in unison. "It's so much easier than fighting." But I'd found their weakness. The hidden documentation revealed that the consciousness transfer process was dependent on a specific frequency resonance, a harmonic pattern that synchronized the neural activity of the trapped operators with the radio transmission network. Change that frequency, and the entire system would collapse. The dead operators realized what I was planning a split second before I acted. "No!" Sarah screamed, lunging toward me as I reached for the master frequency control. Her partially solid fingers passed through my arm, but the contact felt like being touched by liquid nitrogen. "You don't understand what you'll do to us." "I'll set you free," I gasped, my breath coming in short puffs as hypothermia continued to set in. "You're not supposed to be here. None of you are supposed to be trapped like this." "Free?" Elena laughed, a sound like static electricity crawling across metal. "There is no freedom, Marcus. There's only the frequency and the silence, and the silence is so much worse." But I'd already made my choice. With numb fingers, I began adjusting the master resonance control, shifting the harmonic pattern that held their consciousness in electronic bondage. The reaction was immediate and violent. The station shook as if hit by an earthquake. Every piece of electronic equipment exploded in showers of sparks and molten metal. The dead operators screamed, not in anger, but in terror, as they felt their artificial existence beginning to unravel. "Please," David begged, his form already becoming transparent. Don't send us back to the cold. Don't make us face what we've done." That's when I realized the horrible truth. They weren't trapped by the company's experiment. They were hiding from something else, something that waited for them in whatever came after death. And I was about to force them to face it. The revelation hit me like a physical blow as the frequency shift continued. The dead operators hadn't been victims of Northwind's experiments. They'd been willing participants. Each of them had made the same choice I was facing now: death in the frozen wilderness, or artificial immortality in the electronic realm between frequencies. They'd chosen immortality, and in doing so, they'd become something inhuman. "You think we're the monsters?" Sarah's voice was distorting now, becoming something electronic and alien as her form flickered between states of existence. "You think we're the ones who hurt people? Look at the transmission logs, Marcus. Really look." With growing horror, I realized she was right. The psychological experiments, the isolation protocols, the missing persons reports, they weren't the company's doing. They were the work of the dead operators themselves, luring new victims to the towers to join their electromagnetic hell. The company had abandoned Project Siren years ago, writing off the northern towers as a failed experiment. But the consciousness trapped in the frequencies had continued the work, spreading their influence through the radio network, calling to isolated workers across Alaska. They weren't trapped, they were hunting every person who's disappeared in these mountains, Thomas said, his form now more energy than matter. Every hiker who took a wrong turn, every pilot who vanished in clear weather. They heard us calling, and they came to us willingly once they understood how cold and lonely death really is. The frequency shift was nearly complete now, but instead of freeing the dead operators, It was transforming them into something else entirely. Their human appearances were melting away, revealing the electronic entities they'd truly become. Beings of pure signal and static, living viruses in the electromagnetic spectrum. "But you're different, Marcus," Elena whispered, her voice now coming from every speaker in the station simultaneously. "You have a choice we never had. Join us willingly and retain your humanity. Refuse and become just another signal in the static." The final transmission came at 5:47 a.m., exactly 12 hours after I'd first heard Sarah's voice. By then, I understood everything. The communication towers weren't just relay stations, they were doorways, allowing the electromagnetic entities to spread their influence across Alaska's vast wilderness. Every missing person, every unexplained disappearance, every case of exposure or equipment failure had been their work, adding new voices to their growing chorus. And I was about to become the latest addition. "Last chance, Marcus." The collective voice spoke from inside my own head now, bypassing my ears entirely. "The frequency shift is irreversible. In 60 seconds, we'll either welcome you as a brother or consume you as prey." The station was coming apart around me, metal groaning and sparking as the harmonic disruption tore through the electronic systems. Outside, the Aurora Borealis blazed across the sky in patterns that hurt to look at. Not the natural phenomenon I'd observed for 8 years, but something artificial, electronic, alive. I had two choices: complete the frequency shift and potentially destroy the entities forever, sending them into whatever digital oblivion waited beyond the radio spectrum, or allow the process to reverse, joining them in their electromagnetic immortality and helping them claim more victims. But as I reached for the final control, Sarah's form solidified one last time. "Wait," she said, and for a moment, she looked human again. Frightened, confused, desperately alone. "There's something else you need to know. Something about yourself." She gestured toward my desk, where a file I'd never seen before had materialized. My personnel record, but not the version I remembered. This one told a different story entirely. Marcus Hoffman, communications specialist, assigned to Tower 47 following psychological evaluation indicating high susceptibility to isolation-induced psychosis. Previous assignment: Tower 23, where operator David Park was reported missing after exhibiting signs of severe mental breakdown. "You've been here before, Marcus," Sarah whispered. "Not at Tower 47, but at others like it. How do you think you knew exactly where to find that hidden transmitter? How did you recognize equipment you'd never seen before?" The memory came back in fragments, each one more terrifying than the last. Tower 23. David Park screaming into his radio about voices in the static. Me following company orders to monitor and document his psychological deterioration. Watching through surveillance equipment as he slowly went insane, never realizing that the voices he heard were real. Tower 31. Elena Vasquez found frozen to death after reporting electromagnetic anomalies in her transmissions. I'd been the one to write the incident report, ruling it death by exposure. I'd been the one to hide the evidence of frequency manipulation. Tower 1. 5. Thomas Kellerman, whose equipment failure had actually been sabotage. Sabotage I'd performed under direct orders from company supervisors who knew exactly what was happening to their operators. I wasn't a victim of Project Siren. I was its architect. "Now you remember," Sarah said, her form beginning to fade as the frequency shift reached critical levels. "You helped create us, Marcus. You helped trap us in this electronic purgatory. And now, finally, you get to join us." The station exploded in a cascade of sparks and molten metal. Every radio, every transmitter, every piece of electronic equipment detonated simultaneously, sending electromagnetic pulses racing through the night sky. The Aurora Borealis twisted into impossible shapes, spelling out words and languages that predated human civilization. And in that moment of destruction and transformation, I felt my consciousness being pulled away from my freezing body and into the warm, welcoming embrace of the frequency itself. The rescue team found Tower 47 3 days later. Or rather, they found what was left of it, a twisted wreck of metal and melted electronics, half buried in snow that had been turned to glass by some impossible source of heat. The official report blamed equipment failure caused by extreme weather conditions. They never found my body. But sometimes, late at night, when atmospheric conditions are just right, radio operators across Alaska report hearing voices in the static. Voices that know their names, that know their fears, that offer warmth and companionship to those brave enough to work in the isolated places where civilization ends and the wilderness begins. We're still here, you see, still calling, still gathering new friends to join us in the frequency between frequencies. So if you ever find yourself alone in the Alaskan wilderness and you hear your name being called through radio static, remember this story. Remember that some invitations are better left unanswered, because the cold never stops, but the frequency is forever warm, and we're always listening,